Welcome to Renewable Now's Business Side of Green with your host, Peter Arpin. For the next half hour, learn about how business and sustainability can go hand in hand. And now, here's your host, Peter Arpin.
Thank you so much, Michael. Welcome back, everyone, to Renewable Now at renewablenow.biz on 1320 WRMP and WARA on Blogger. Today, we welcome back Jason Dodier from Schneider, but he is in a different role today, as is Roger Tipley, and they are with the Green Grid Association. And Roger is the president, chairman, and founder. So, Roger, first, we welcome you to the business side of Green. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Roger, your background then, what has led you to your role there as founder, chairman, and president of the Green Grid?
Yeah, I'm one of the founders. We founded this organization just about exactly 10 years ago with initially 11 companies on the board, and we grew that to well over 200 companies. And
the founding companies, that's always of interest.
Yeah, so the membership of the Green Grid Association really are member companies. That's who funds the association, and then we are an all-volunteer army of typically employees of those organizations, and a few other individuals that are individual contractors and that sort of thing that have volunteered to be a part of this as well.
Who were some of the founding companies, Roger?
Among others, the actual original founder was Advanced Micro Devices, AMD, and they thought up this Green Grid Association and invited other companies to come along. They had IT companies like Hewlett-Packard, IBM, Dell, IT companies like Microsoft. We've had over the years on the board companies like Google. We have colo companies like Digital.
Pretty impressive lineup. Certainly names that anybody anywhere in the world would recognize. Now, one of your newest officers is Jason Dodier, Schneider Electric. Jason, welcome back to the show.
Peter, it's an absolute privilege. Thank you so much for having us.
We're going to get into the specifics with both of you of why the Green Grid Association, what does it do, what does it mean to all of us. What was the attraction for you, Jason? How does it fit in with what you're doing now?
Thanks, Peter. So it fits in very well. Having been overseas, internationally working within the ICT and energy management space, and also being a millennial that has a deep passion here, I feel deeply privileged to be part of this core group of visionaries. We really look to constantly shed light on technologies of the future. Really, there's a constant law and rate of enhancement in the business today, and the Green Grid really stands strong. And Roger mentioned some of the companies that are members. We've got such a strong reach all over the world to kind of establish and lead our mission, right? So looking at different metrics, understanding the risks, engaging different government organizations to move forward and make sure that within the information and communication technology community, we're being as efficient as possible. And I'm just proud to be the treasurer, part of the board, and leading to drive things forward.
Well, we love the word efficient. That's for certain here at Renewable Now. Roger, then give us more about the kind of the mission, the purpose, the design. Jason touched on it, but give us some more specifics.
All right. So the stated mission for the Green Grid is to drive effective and accountable resource efficiency across the entire information and communications technology ecosystem, which is a long sentence meaning we're focused on sustainable IT. And so that is the subject that motivates, like I say, our all-volunteer army to go out and produce what we do. So we're out there. We're creating. What we do is typically white papers around how best practices or metrics, keep KPIs, key performance indices to show how your data center or your company can really take this into its business and show improvement over time. Now, if you don't have any way to measure something, you can't show improvement. And so, we're there to help make sure that you have a way to measure that.
And Roger, it would be fair to say that we've seen a lot of improvement around data center performance over the last 10 years, right? They're dropping energy use, probably more effective design, more flexible design. Has a lot of that come out of these last 10 years and around working groups like the Green Grid Association?
So that's a really good historical point. So really 10 years ago, what formed the green grid back then was a scare that companies and the governments of the world all saw with some reports that came out from Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. In 2006, there was a report that said data centers took up 1.5% of all of our electricity. The next year, the report came out 2%. And they were shooting this line that showed that, in the next 10 years, data centers were going to eat up all the electrical power in the United States. So that threw some fear into the government and others. And, of course, the industry wasn't going to stand still anyway. But
Roger, was that accurate? I mean, that's a big number, obviously. Were they chewing up almost 2% of the electricity used?
So it was a swag. It was based in some reality of, so 2% probably wasn't a bad number to say as far as electricity goes, how much it was taking up.
Would a lot of that be used to cool the rooms?
So back then, one of the first things we started looking at, because like I said, we got all these companies together. There are infrastructure companies on the power and cooling side, and there are IT companies. We started looking at the overall energy use of data centers in general, and what was pretty clear was most, in fact, 2 to 1 of the energy used in a data center at that time was being used to power and cool, not to put energy to your IT, your critical loads.
That's a starting point, and I know, Jason, you deal with this all the time in your work with Schneider Electric, but it's a starting point, Roger, where it can show a lot of improvement, too.
Absolutely. So we focus on the green grid. The companies in the green grid focused first on that infrastructure. So the very first thing out the door, our first thing we produced was a white paper to describe this metric called power usage effectiveness, also called PUE. That's become adopted throughout the industry. In fact, now, as of about a year ago, has become an international standard through IEC and ISO. So that is how everyone measures the efficient use of energy in their infrastructure, in other words, everything other than their IT. And it's how governments and programs measure goodness. If you say what your PUE score is, that shows how efficient your overall infrastructure is in your data center.
And Jason, as you think about that in relationship even to working with the government, as an example here in the U.S., does that become an important part of the conversation? And does it give rise to government standards where now we have a matrix and we can measure it and we can say this is a good score, this is a bad score? Does that become all of a sudden a mandate from the feds or an international community?
Well, Peter, you're spot on there. I mean, recently there's been an initiative passed in the federal government, M1619, the Federal Data Center Optimization Initiative, coming from the CIO's office, which was Tony Scott. And really, we're trying to look at the overall federal landscape and consolidate data centers to be more efficient. Around the world, and especially in the U.S., you go into a lot of facilities that have poor utilization, energy metering has not been implemented, virtualization is roughly negligent. And as these situations continue to present themselves, you have these IT managers on both sides of the house that don't understand what assets they have. So it's absolutely critical right now from an executive level across the federal landscape that we look at what our customers are doing and how to make them be more effective and improve TCO and energy efficiency. That's really where the green grid comes in and can help advise and provide protocol.
So I want you both to jump in. So explain for us in today's standard then, on the IT side, let's say for a company like ARPAN as an example, would most of our power go into the equipment? Would it go into all the remote locations and the transmission of data? Would it go into the storage? Would it still go into the cooling? Like, how are we burning it up right now?
It depends. If you're being hosted by a company whose business is to run data centers, it's probably being run pretty well so that most of your energy is going to your IT equipment itself. If you're in a hosted colo facility, if you're moving it up to the cloud or somewhere in between, or even if you're a very large enterprise and you're being measured on the efficiency of your data centers, most likely you have decreased your your power and cooling to being less than your IT power. Probably using too much energy.
Which would be a good thing, though, right? If you switched it, reversed it. But I guess my question is, I'm a little confused because we try to be extremely mindful, as Jason knows, of the energy we use. We try to create a lot of renewables. We've invested heavily in efficiency. I have no idea, honestly, how to separate out and measure the amount of electricity kilowatts I'm using in my IT room versus the rest of the building. Can you help me through the process?
Well, the Green Grid does have quite a few ways for you to either estimate or measure that. So we have papers, and one is our book we actually did on how to measure PUE, and in part of that is how to estimate some of these partial loads. So if just part of your overall building is a data center, there are effective ways that you can estimate how efficient and effective that data room is. So yeah, we can help.
And once you do that, then what do you do from there? Do you map out a blueprint, a plan, so that we're upgrading equipment, or we are making it more efficient again in how everything runs through the building? And we've got obviously the PCs and the laptops and how those enter into the equation. Like, once I get that starting point, where do I go from there?
Right. So once you have the baseline, now you have something you can measure against and measure improvement towards. So, probably the most important thing is not so much these metrics, but it's your overall energy bill. And if your company is, if it's not growing, if your company isn't growing, and your energy is growing in kilowatt hours per year, well, that shows that maybe you're doing something inefficient. But if with constant output, constant productivity, if you have declining energy, that means you're being more efficient. So where it gets more complicated is you have a growing enterprise with growing energy, and that's why the metrics we have, like PUE, is our one way of having a baseline that it gives us a way to grow the denominator and still show energy efficiency. So that's one of the methodologies we've put in place so that an enterprise can get larger or smaller or change or invest things and show continuous growth and continuous improvement over time from an ROI perspective.
Well, and I think that's a really good point. And that's exactly how we kind of stack up. We're always looking at total usage, total square footage, total number of employees, obviously averages within the industrial park. So we're certainly on a larger macro level, have a pretty good feel, and then how much of that obviously has been saved, how much is coming from renewables. Before we go to break, either one of you can just recap then, where do you think maybe the most progress has been made in these 10 years, so that this starting point today is a lot better for companies than it was 10 years ago?
Well, two things have happened that have really driven this energy efficiency. One is the IT equipment itself over time has become more virtualized. When it's more virtualized, it's more highly utilized. Something that's highly utilized is going to be the most energy efficient. So couple that with the fact that the IT equipment itself has grown by 10, 100 times performance per watt over that time frame, maybe even higher. So there's a huge amount of productivity for the same amount of energy consumption. When you have a predictable energy footprint, now you can optimize your power and cooling for that. If it's variable or unpredictable, then you have to oversize and waste in your infrastructure and cooling. And so when you have a better idea of what that load is going to be, you can optimize and buy just enough with some headroom so that you don't waste energy anywhere. So that overall end-to-end energy use and getting more productive use out of it.
Well, we like that a lot, Roger, and obviously certainly within the organizations, people would talk about what efficiencies that IT brings, and so the spend there on powering that unit, right, the overall return on moving data and getting smarter and having higher customer service. When we get back, we'll talk a little bit more about that, and we will talk about, again, mapping out perhaps a better future around the grid within companies on their data centers when we get back.
Today's edition of Renewable Now's Business Side of Green is being brought to you by the Arpin Group. Arpin, creating customers for life. Rhode Island College, reach, inspire, and connect. WB Mason for all of your office supplies. And by Cardi's Furniture.
Here's a question for you. Where does the United States get most of its energy? Is it Africa, the Middle East, Canada, or the U.S.? The answer is the U.S. Most of America's energy comes from right here at home. Take the energy quiz. Energy lives here.
Traditional light bulbs actually generate 9 times more heat than light. Switch to Energy Star light bulbs, and you'll realize just how much cash you were really burning through. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov.
You're listening to the Business Side of Green here on RNN.
Thanks for staying with us. Roger Tipley is the president, chairman, and one of the co-founders of the Green Grid Association, and one of the new officers is a familiar voice, Jason Dodier, Schneider Electric. So when you were talking, Roger, about, okay, well, it depends, right? You might have equipment on site, you might co-locate, and you use the cloud. At ARPAN, I know we have all of that. Would it be fair to say, and Jason, you jump in, that most companies have some kind of mix? And so if they have at least elements of a co-location for backup and they're using the cloud in some fashion, then those parts are pretty efficient right now?
Peter, it's an excellent point. You start to see that across. I mean, having dealt with commercial and federal, we have the hybrid cloud. You have disaster recovery locations, which a lot of customers, it really depends on what space the end user or person is playing in. So if it's, we talked about it briefly, Peter, if it's, I was saying that depending on the end user or the vertical, for example, some institutions like finance might like to have a private cloud or on-premise computing, so they'll have their own server rooms or data center. Other government agencies, some of them are actually looking into having clouds and they're hosting other agencies. So it really depends on the vision of the business and what they're looking to do, and also how much compute and power needs are. So you've got to have that baseline, have a real strong understanding of where you are today in terms of your overall kilowatts per hour over a year, and then you can make a decision as an organization whether to leverage the cloud, have something on premise, or a hybrid, a mix of both. But it's the key premise is really what kind of industry you're operating.
And it's a little bit like deciding on a turbine where you're collecting data, right, with a wind meter for at least a year, and you're really starting to understand, is it at night or is it during the day or is it on the weekend, and how you might share some of that power and some of those facilities even on a remote basis. Jason, as you talk to customers about these things, and obviously these types of investments have incredible returns as they drive down operating costs and expand capability. But as you talk to them, what about this potential sea change around, let's say in the United States, investment tax credits are different, or, you know, the financing or the return or the amount of incentive or government expectations around meeting certain levels of efficiency? Is that must directly impact the job, right, of bringing these companies into a state of efficiency that would be supported by the green grid?
Well, it certainly plays a big role. I think the last time during our discussion we talked about some different pieces of energy. It was a lot about solar and some of the incentives that come with that, right?
Right.
The government, some of the meetings I've had locally, they look at, hierarchy of needs and energy being essential for the provision of all things, from clean water to every aspect of day-to-day life. And you have to take that into consideration when you look at implementing. And whether the company's a manufacturer, whatever role they serve, whether it's Walt Disney, Fujitsu, or Dell, the Green Grid provides standards and tactics and really access to government that allows us to kind of shape those protocols and objectives to move things forward, because it is, as we've seen and we've tried to do in Rhode Island, it's a complex environment, but you have to really state the case and have the materials and resources to back it up and then make that presentation to move forward and get some subsidies and credits in place. But we are seeing some good things happen.
And as you said, and one of the questions I have, and you can both jump in, is as you get to a level of sophistication, understanding of data, and certainly efficiency, the next step for us was investing heavily in renewables. Is that part of what the Green Grid brings to the table?
We do have a focus there. Primarily, we're looking at just basic efficiencies, trying to reduce the actual energy, or at least minimize the energy spend to just what you need to have. But we do have metrics that do value the fact that you may have renewable energy sources out there. One of the things I can envision over the next few years for the Green Grid to be working on is actually to delve more deeply into that question. If you look at the overall palette of what is renewable energy, there are a wide spectrum of greennesses in that renewable spectrum. Everything from being fairly carbon neutral to being, extremely green. The mixture goes from things like hydro, wind, and solar, which operationally have a very low carbon footprint, to other things where you're just burning things that are renewable, that they're causing a CO2 footprint, but the fact that like biofuels and that sort of thing, good thing to have renewable energy that you're burning, but you're still burning.
Well, and it's interesting because, again, a lot of the information changes. So recently we've been reading where maybe dams and hydro create more carbon than we first realized. But hopefully, as you said, you can start to orientate people to renewables, certainly, and to getting off the grid a little bit, to fixing some of their costs. Did you touch on battery storage and whether that's part of the equation as well?
Well, certainly energy storage is a way to make things like wind and solar, which are periodic and not always there, available.
I meant storage on site at the companies. More storage for use for potentially, let's say, it's kind of like the hybrid buildings where they would store the energy that they take in from the grid at a cheaper rate, right, and use it. And those kind of integrations.
Yeah, if your region and your company has variable power, a lot of the big data centers don't have that. They book it at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. It doesn't matter what time of day or what part of the year. But for smaller businesses, that makes a lot more sense, so that they can store it when it's cheap or store it when it's green and available coming off your solar panels, so that it's available in the middle of the night when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing.
And what about, so I give you a lot of credit, Roger, because those are some big names in the same room, and it's not always easy to get people to collaborate and cooperate. How do you get this group, whether they're manufacturers or they're software folks or whatever the case might be, how do you get them into this kind of unified, we're going to set these standards and we're going to work together on every single part of IT to make it as efficient as possible?
It's a great point. That co-opetition happens because we're aligned to the same set of goals. If you go back to that word sustainable has three elements to it. One is people, second is planet, and the third is profit. So people, planet, profit. The overlap of those things, if you have healthy people, healthy planet, and healthy business, that is sustainable. If you take any one of those three out, it is not sustainable. So every time people use that word sustainability, there has to be that business aspect in it. So, at the end, we're talking about the return on investments, and those investments might be the fact that we're, burning fuel to cause some pollution, or using energy or using water. Those are all investments as much as they are money going into it. The return for that, though, is what you have to measure is, are the economic benefits worth it? Are the environmental benefits or negatives worth it? And in the end, are the humans who are being affected by that benefiting from it? So if you have all those three as a yes, that all three of those areas are doing well, then you'll be sustainable. Then the governments of the world will be smiling upon you. The fact that we have these smarter grids, smarter cities, smarter buildings, those all happen because you have IT and data centers out there.
Well, and I think there's
because you have data centers.
Building blocks to the things you're talking about. So if a company is ultimately going to be, I should say a building as an example, is going to be smart, there's a lot of things that have to be put in place, including really good data management, and I think renewables, and then you start figuring out, do you become a hybrid building and a microgrid, and how do you interact with a smart grid? Only about 4 minutes left. Big companies, big multi-internationals, so your work is on a global scale, is that correct?
We're global, and we view our job as an organization, we're viewing the data center inward, but also we're talking about how do we interact with that smart grid or with that smart city. So we're not the smart grid people, we're the compute grid people. So we're trying to look at how intelligently that building can interact with a grid that may have variable power availabilities, variable capacities, trying to deal with the things you were talking about with wind and solar, which may or may not be there all the time. Trying to play those optimization games and deal with expectations of the utilities and vice versa, so that we have, in the end, the most business profitable operations we can.
Well, absolutely, and it's kind of a paradox, I guess, right? That we need all that data and we got to collect it and crunch it and run it, and at the same time, that obviously adds to the stress of a data center and to a building. Last 3 minutes, really quick. Tell us about the next few years. What do you hope to achieve on behalf of your members?
Well, it's an exciting time because we're seeing. I'm old enough to have been through the mainframe to microprocessor to back to the cloud, and now we're in that next wave where we're finding the next point where things are actually kind of moving back to the edge. So back to the edge means that there are so many things that are latency sensitive that need to have data closer to the actual user, filtered from the impact of sending things to the cloud. That's where the exciting development is going to happen. And we talked about 6.4 billion IoT devices. That was the quote for December this last year. So that 6.4 billion devices cannot all be hitting a cloud data center in the sky somewhere. So somewhere out in the edge, in that fog computing that goes around that, you have to be able to serve it there. And whether that's in your local site, whether it's in a nearby colo facility or however, that is going to be the challenge to make sure that we do that, again, the most effectively for our business.
That's a big number. Jason, real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I would just wrap up by saying on my side, you and I know, Peter, we've talked about it. Renewable generation is estimated to rise 25% or more. Roger was brilliant in saying people, planet, profit, really the key aspects to anything we're trying to do and anybody trying to have an impact or make a difference. I highly encourage everybody to check out the Green Grid. We've got a variety of roles and people all over the world that are engaged, and we're really trying to engage more, Peter, quite frankly, with the education community. You'd be shocked to see we've got from as varied as University of Michigan to California Public Employee Retirement System and IDA Singapore engaged in our group. So it's a fascinating force of thought leaders in the industry that are together, and we hope to grow it.
It is. It's a positive impact. Jason, it's a great brain trust. As soon as you sent it to me, I sent it to our IT guys. Said, "Hey, Arpin's got to take a look." Roger Tipley of the Green Grid and Jason Dodier Schneider. Thanks for being with us, Michael. Good job. I'm Peter Arpin for Renewable Now and RNN, the show and the network that bring you the business side of Grid.